For being here.
Jordan, I cannot believe we get to do this again.
This
It's
is
an
really
honor. I
special.
wish I wish we were hanging out in the garage slash barn slash whatever that thing is that you guys have. That was
Whatever this
your
thing
that
is.
facility where we met was amazing or is amazing.
This is the next best thing to be able to have you here through the internet, and I appreciate you taking some time to be here today. Parents and families who are watching this or listening to this, thanks for being here. This is a follow-up, really maybe the Let's Talk Family Night Part 2. For those of you who joined, what an incredible night that was. I think we had about 160 or so parents in the room
Wow.
just leaning into parenting and talking about just some of the hard realities of what it's like to parent a child right now. But we're in it together, and we talked about some big things that night: identity, sexuality, social media, technology, and what we heard after that was just, man, I wish we had more time. I wish we had more time. I wish we could have talked about more. And so here it is. This is part 2, and this is actually the third session that we did not end up having enough time for at that night. And so today we are just going to continue the conversation about having hard conversations with your kids and with teenagers. And so we'll just kick it off and throw it over to you, Stuart. But having hard conversations with your kids, especially in teenage years. I don't have any teenagers of my own, but I hang out with teenagers a lot. And hard conversations, I guess it's in the title, but they're hard. They're awkward.
Yes,
They're
that's
uncomfortable.
right, right. And I want to say this in front of everybody. Jordan, you're an exceptional leader of the next generation, and Renovation Hampstead is really, really lucky to have you. And I mean that sincerely. I think one of the things that's key in us understanding how to have hard conversations is expecting to have them. I think
Right.
part of our issue as parents of teenagers, especially, is that most of us have never been parents of teenagers. We've been teenagers, but we haven't been parents of teenagers. And just because you've been a kid doesn't mean you know how to raise a kid. And
Right.
it certainly doesn't mean you know how to have really difficult conversations. But the other side of it that is kind of it's sensical and logical. Most, if not all of us at some point or another, when we were teenagers, had hard conversations with our parents. So it makes sense that we would expect that those are coming. Part of the reason why it makes sense to expect that those are coming is just, and I think we have this on a slide. You can go to that next slide. Part of it is the reality is that so much of the data is telling us that teenagers are in a difficult place. I mean, 1 out of every 3 teenagers is saying they're struggling in some way, shape, or form with mental health. 51% of teenagers report that adults in their life do not know how deeply they're struggling. 52% of them have no trust in organized religion. Think about that. That means that the faith community that you are so committed to, more than half of the general teenage public is distrusting of institutional religion.
Mm-hmm.
So, someone like you and I who works in a faith organization
Yeah.
or in faith organizations, it would make sense that teenagers desperately need to talk to someone, and mom and dad, we should be the safest people for them to talk to.
Mm-hmm.
That they should want to talk to us more. You go to the next screen. During the pandemic, this is pretty phenomenal. During the pandemic, more than half of teenagers reported experiencing some sort of emotional abuse. Think about that.
Yeah.
And 1 in 10 reported experiencing some sort of physical abuse. In 2020, the number of self-harm insurance claims for teenagers rose by 99%, and 1 in 5 have considered suicide. 1 in 10 have attempted suicide. So the reality is, having a difficult conversation, whether it's a teenager initiating it or mom and dad initiating it with their child, it we should almost consider it, Jordan, I think, a prerequisite for parenting. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have difficult conversations. And
Yeah.
because we're going to have difficult conversations, I think this is on the next slide, Jordan. all of us listening, all of us watching, it would make sense that we go ahead and pre-decide what we're going to do. The way that I look at it is the same. It's the same mentality, whether it is a tornado drill at school or it's, unfortunately, an active shooter on campus. We practice fire drills, we practice tornado drills, and now, I mean, God forbid, an active shooter on campus. We drill our children in those things. Why not go ahead and pre-decide how we're going to handle if one of our children, or one of our teenagers needs to have a difficult conversation, whether they initiate it or whether we initiate it. And
that's great.
Part of the tension here, I think, Jordan, is being sensitive enough to know, for example, if a kid or we say, I need to talk to you, or can I tell you something? I think this is kind of comical, but part of being a great parent, if you'll go to that next slide, is developing spidey senses. Like, we need to be Spider-Man. We need to know when a kid says, I need to talk to you, or can I talk to you about something, or I need to talk to you about something, we have the capacity to kind of lay down whatever we're doing and pick up right immediately, my son or daughter, or I need to talk to you. And, just to have fun, if you'll go to the next slide, this is actual footage of a dad whose teenager just asked if they could talk to him about something. That is our tendency. Like, because it feels tense, we think I'm out. And part of the reason we feel like I'm out is it's one thing for us to hear the question or initiate the conversation, but and then what? Like, what happens next? That really is, I think, where the tension is. If you'll go ahead 2 slides, and the only reason we're keeping these slides in front of you, for those of you that are visual, is so that you'll have something to maybe take a picture of. You can keep a record of it. But the question is, what do you do when your teenager gets the courage to tell you something that may be hard to hear or hard for them to say? That it takes just as much courage for a teenager to have enough courage to say something to you as it does for you. And you just showed it. Like, what do we do as parents? And I am convinced, 30-something years of working with the next generation and parenting for 28 years, our oldest is 28. The first thing moms and dads have to really be considerate of is body language. Yeah. Like, how do you respond when one of your children says something to you that is scary? This is an amazing data point. 93% of what we believe, what we learn, what we understand about another person comes from something other than the words that come out of our mouth. Think about that. As parents, that is the most difficult thing for us, is how do I respond outwardly to what I hear? And again, just to have some fun, we'll troll through these pretty quick. But we have a tendency when we hear something really alarming, like we could be in the middle of a drink and we give this kind of face. Or next slide, we try to play it cool. Thank you, Kevin Hart, for helping me with this. Or this is when it really gets dicey. This is our response. Or sometimes, like, anger kicks in. It's easy for us to kind of respond in ways that aren't necessarily communicating to our child, hey, you're safe with me. And I like to talk about this idea of the swan on the pond. It's okay for you and I to be freaking out on the inside. But what's not okay is for us to communicate something outwardly that says to a child, what you have to say and I need to hear is not safe with me. And as funny as Kevin Hart is, these faces, too often, those are the way that we respond to our kids. And it winds up already putting them on the defensive. Or even when we initiate it, we can initiate from places that say to them, what I need to say to you isn't safe for you to hear. So that's number one. How are you going to how are you going to, respond outwardly to whatever's being said?
Yeah,
Does
that's
that
really
make
good.
sense?
It does. Yeah. Can I ask a maybe like a big
Yeah.
conceptual question about this?
Yeah.
The body language piece, but also even as you were talking about at the beginning, expecting the conversation and planning for them. We plan for fire drills, tornado drill, all these things, but planning for awkward or hard conversations, it's just like, man, we don't plan for that. Then it happens, catches us off guard, and suddenly we may react in a way that is not, of course, is one of these faces or, slides that you've put up here. But my question was more so, what changes from when a kid is in elementary school? Like, are hard conversations happening there? Are they just different? What changes when we get into middle and high school that makes these conversations so different, so unique? Or, maybe some parents are like, man, elementary, difficult conversations, I'm crushing those. But now they seem to have changed. Like, I don't know, what maybe changes, or what do you think happens when students move into those, into puberty, into developmental years, through
Right.
middle school and high school, that makes these conversations unique?
Such a brilliant question. I think a lot changes. One of the major things that changes, Jordan, is that when a child, developmentally, when children move from concrete thinking to abstract thinking, concepts don't make as much sense. They go from they're trying to be engineers. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is that during the first part of high school years, the limbic system is kicking in as fast as it can. Prefrontal cortex is not fully developed, so their risk aversion is lower, and their capacity to make wise decisions is also lower.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason why you can look at one of your children as a ninth, 10th, 11th grader, and you could literally say the other thing I didn't mention is that a high schooler is losing brain cells to the same amount as a child, because a child is it. I'm sorry, they're producing all of these
Right.
synapses, and then they start losing brain cells as a child. Their gray matter begins to just basically flesh itself out. So all of us as parents of high schoolers have looked at our kids and gone, what were you thinking? And the reality is they weren't thinking. Or have you lost your mind? Well, yes, they are. They are losing brain cells just as they develop. So I think that's part of it. You couple the development of the brain and what is happening emotionally and physically in the life of middle schooler and high schooler, and you connect that to social media access. You connect that to, and we talked about this, that night. You're talking about social media access. You're talking about they live in a porn saturated culture. They're
Right.
the first post-Christian generation in the history of our country. So not only is their prefrontal cortex, which is the moral center of their brain, not fully developed, but they also are being flooded with all this imagery, all these ideas. And the harsh reality is, no matter how much we raise our children in faith communities, they are surrounded by people who do not have what would be considered a moral code. And that's just a recipe for disaster. I grew up in a time where it takes a village to raise a child was really true. I was actually giggling today because this weekend I'm speaking at a church actually in the great state of North Carolina. And I was looking at the story of Jesus when Mary and Joseph lost him when he was 12. And I've never noticed this before, but literally they had to turn around. Jerusalem to Nazareth is a 40-mile stretch, which by foot would have meant you're almost talking a week probably. And it took Mary and Joseph a day to realize that Jesus wasn't around.
Yeah.
Why? Well, because they were living in a time where the village helped raise a child, and he was with their caravan, and they thought he was good. We don't live in those times anymore.
Right.
So all of that combined, I think, is part of the reason why the older our children get, the more significant the stakes are, the more critical the conversations are.
Yeah.
And I hate to say this, but as the parent of a 28-year-old, 26-year-old, and 23-year-old, it is harder for us parenting our older kids than it was when they were teenagers, because the stakes just get higher. Like decisions and things that our children are wrestling with now, what they were dealing with as high schoolers, it pales in comparison.
Yeah.
Sorry to not be very hopeful for all the moms and dads who are ready to be empty nesters, but I think it's more difficult.
Yeah.
But to keep us moving, it's one thing for you to respond from a body language perspective. It's a completely a different thing. And number two is have a strategy for saying something. It's not enough to go, well, I want to respond outwardly, okay. But do you have a strategy for how you're going to respond? What is it that you're going to say? And to go along with the fire drill, tornado drill, if we know the conversations are going to happen, we should practice what we're going to say. I don't think it's a bad idea for moms and dads to role play having difficult conversations, because we know it's coming. And not only role play conversations, but how you respond. I listed some of these on the next slide. If our child presents something to us, learn how to say, thank you for telling me. That was incredibly brave. Wow. I know that was really, really hard. I am so sorry. I don't know what you're going through. I think it sets us up for failure as parents and sometimes, Jordan, we say it and we don't even realize we can't say it. There are things our children are going through that we didn't go through. So for us to say, I know what you're going through, is not true, and they know it. So the idea of I don't know what you're going through, but we can figure this out together, I think helps a child realize my mom and dad are with me.
Right.
Most of the time, the reason why our children don't want to tell us something is because they think it's going to affect the relationship. And so for our children to go, here's what's going on, and for us to say, I love you unconditionally and nothing you can tell me will change that, is huge. Every summer, I put this picture in my slides. Every summer, I've spoken for the last 25 years at a camp. And it never fails that every single summer, especially in Florida, North Carolina, you guys live at the beach, you understand this. This gigantic storm will come up while everybody's out on the beach. You know what nobody does? Everybody makes sure they're safe first. Very few people are like, hey, let's just ride it out. This looks kind of ugly, but we'll just ride it out. Everybody that I know prioritizes safety first. So when our children are brave enough to say something to us, the first thing we have to do is to prioritize their safety. It has to be premium in our minds. We need to let our teenagers know that your safety is the most important thing to me. You being in a safe place and me being a safe person is so incredibly important to me. And all of that has to do with us, how we respond, what we say. The second thing that I would say is that we have to give them time and space to breathe. It takes so much courage for a teenager to have enough courage for them to say something difficult to us, that I think sometimes moms and dads, we feel this rush to solving the problem as opposed to letting them get it out and letting it breathe a little bit. Because sometimes all the kid needed to do, I can think back to so many times with all three of our kids, what they needed more than anything else, Jordan, was just to get it off their chest.
Right.
And sometimes what they think is huge really isn't that big of a deal. And as soon as they say it out loud, you're able to help them go, well, that's not really as big as you've made it out to be. But give it time and space to breathe. And once you give it time and space to breathe, then start talking about immediate steps. What are the immediate steps that we need to take to resolve the issue, to help you with the issue? But don't rush to number 3 before you let them kind of sit in what they've said. I think it's important for us to do that. And then also, I think it's also important for us to set an expectation for future conversations about what they've shared. Because some things can be resolved immediately. Other things set up another conversation. And what we don't need our teenagers to do is to feel like, I've got to solve this, cross the T's, dot the I's tonight. Because it could be that whatever has been shared is so big that you can't resolve it overnight. And I put this in my notes, and I hope this doesn't sting too bad for a lot of us. There is a time to correct behavior. There's a time to talk about strategic preparedness. There's a time to talk about broader theological issues of everything. But it's just like being on the beach when a storm comes. Now's not the time. Now's the time. Do they feel safe? And am I providing them the care that they need? Does that feel right to you? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah,
I
100%.
think,
I mean, I think I reflect back on me going to my parents with things as a high schooler and being terrified, not because of anything they did towards me or any bad parenting at all, but just, man, this thing felt huge to me, and I just didn't know how they were going to react to it. But I do remember back to this, like just one moment, I could remember it so crystal clear where my mom acknowledged just that little thing you said, just like, man, thank you so much for saying that. It's just like, took a second, breathe. Thank you for telling me that, because she could obviously tell I was probably, I'm sweating while I'm saying it or something like that. Realize the significance of it. For her, it's probably like, whatever. But that is so big, and I think, as you mentioned, that piece probably gets skipped more than anything else, right? Let's just get to next steps. Let's get to the details. What do we need to do now? Who do we need to call? Who do we need, where do we need to go? That type of thing. Especially, I don't know, probably for both. I'd say probably more so for dads. I would say maybe so. It's like, let's solve the problem. What do we got to do?
Yeah. One of the things that Kelly and I have done, we are at that age where our children are at the age where it's probably safe for us to do this now. I'd use the term safe loosely because it stings, but we've asked our kids, all three of them, to a person individually, what did we do right and what did we do wrong? What were the wins and what were the losses? Like, where did we nail it and where do you wish we would have been better? And every Grant, Chandler, and Cameron to a person has said that we wish you would. They felt at times like our expectations of them were so high that we would not respond well. And all three of them with issues that in the scope of things now, not big deals. But our expectations of them were so high that they didn't feel like they could come to us. And as a dad, it breaks my heart that the good thing is the beautiful thing is that there's always time to get better as a parent. As long as you have breath in your lungs and your children are with you, that's the beautiful thing. God's given us another day, a new day to get better. Right. But as someone a little farther down the road than a lot of moms and dads that are watching this, I wish I would have been a safer place because I was that dad that wanted to solve it immediately. And the other thing, too, that's interesting, Jordan, is that a lot of times Kelly and I would have looked at you when we were raising our kids and said we do not have unrealistic expectations on our kids. In our minds, we didn't, but our children interpreted just life as my mom and dad expect a lot from me. And I don't want to let them down. And way too often our kids pick up some things that we're not trying to lay down. They just do. They just interpret things from mom and dad that mom and dad don't necessarily want them to feel. The third step in all of this is who else? Because there are some things that our kids may share with us that are beyond our pay scale as a parent. And I know I'm not hurting your feelings in saying this. They're beyond your pastoral staff's pay scale. And unfortunately, in faith communities and faith circles for far too long. We've talked about issues like mental health, and we frame them as sin issues instead of mental health issues. Mom and dad, you hopefully know more about your teenager than anybody else does. You have insight in what's going on. And if you have a faith community that's partnering with you, that's a gift, because most moms and dads don't have that. That's, why, and I've told you this repeatedly when I was there just a few weeks ago. It's why, in my estimation, Jordan, you're in the top 1%, and your church is in the top 1% of churches and youth ministries in America, because you, as a student pastor, and your church wants to walk alongside moms and dads. That's an incredible gift, that a faith community would be a safe place for a teenager, a safe place for a mom and dad. That is huge. But there may be a time, and this is 2 slides forward, there may be a time, though, moms and dads, where you'll need to talk to more than just a pastor. There may be something that comes up that is just beyond what Jordan understands, how to give discerning advice, that may require a professional. And anytime I talk about this, Jordan, I think it's important that I bring this up to moms and dads, because we do it with youth ministry leaders and we do it with staff people, but we don't do it enough with moms and dads. If you ever find out that your teenager, and I call them the 3 hurts.
We talk about these with our youth team all the time.
Yeah. But moms and dads too often don't get this kind of training, or they don't hear this kind of thing. But mom and dad, if your child is ever talking about hurting themselves, being hurt by somebody else, or hurting someone else, you have a mandatory obligation to make sure that your son or daughter is getting the help that they need. Unfortunately, you cannot keep that information to yourself. And way too often, moms and dads feel this and a lot of times it's because we take it as an affront to us. Like, I have failed my child, or I've messed up. No. The greatest parents I know in the world have had a child who is hurting. Like, there's a pain that they can't understand. So if I could give any encouragement to a mom and dad that are listening to this, if your child has come to you and they've talked about being hurt by someone, hurting themselves, or hurting someone else, it's important for you to take that seriously. You cannot keep that information to yourself. It's important that you respond appropriately. And if you'll skip ahead 2 slides, I have actually dealt with this, Jordan. I've heard moms and dads tell me that they told their child, when their child was sharing something with them, where they stopped their child and said, "If you tell me anything more, I'm going to have to tell someone else." And I want to say this with all the love and compassion in my heart. Mom and dad, that's how cowards lead. That is not how people who love their children lead. And I just want to tell you, I understand the angst. I get that. But you can stay on that slide, because that's a good one for us to talk about. You can't refuse your own responsibility as the adult in the conversation, because that puts all the pressure on your child. So it's important, if our kids tell us something, that we do not put that decision on your teenager who's already in crisis, to decide by themselves whether or not they want to say anything more. That's just not fair to the kid. We have to be the grown-ups in that situation. And if I may, this is, I think, 2 slides ahead. If the teenager has the courage to tell you something, you have to have the courage to handle what happens next. I want to say that again. If your child has enough courage to tell you something, you have to have the courage to handle whatever happens next. And I've kind of scripted this out, and this is on a slide. I think this is good for us to kind of think through. It's just as simple as, I believe you, and because I believe you and I take you seriously, I can't keep this to myself. But here's my promise to you. Whatever's going to happen next, I'm going to be right beside you. You're not going to have to handle this by yourself. And you're not going to have to handle this alone anymore. Like, it's the promise of a mom and dad that this is serious, and we're going to get you help. But I'm going to be beside you because you've been walking in darkness by yourself up until this point. And I'm a safe enough person that I will not let you walk this alone. And I know this is really tense and can almost seem melodramatic. If you'll go to the next slide, most moms and dads aren't going to have conversations like this. Some of you will, but most of us, these are not the conversations that you're having every week. Conversations you're having every week, if you'll go to that next slide, are things as simple as you're talking about studying, house rules, curfew, girls, guys, what are you wearing, what's for dinner, clean your, however you use expletives room. We know Pastor John, what he says. But why do I bring that up? Because shared experiences lay a foundation of trust. When you're handling what seems like, I just read this today, Jordan, and I was like, man, that's so perfect for what we're going to talk about. It's the difference between bullets and cannonballs. Like, if we can handle bullets, we can handle cannonballs. And way too often, we don't handle bullets well, and then when something big comes, we fall apart. It's these shared experiences that seem like insignificant things. Those are the things that lay the foundation of trust. Mm-hmm. And I get this. There's a parent probably listening, and you're going, but this is like, I didn't sign up for this. Like, even I had conversations, you had conversations after that night with moms and dads who are dealing with really significant things. And so you're going, I don't know if I can handle this. I don't know if I'm the person. And I just want to pose this question. If it's not you, then who? Like, our children are going to look for someone where they feel safe, where they can share something. And if they can't find someone, that puts them in more of a crisis mode. Mm-hmm. And just to remind us, if it's not us talking about mental health and suicide with our kids, who? If it's not us addressing abuse when it happens, who? If it's not us addressing abuse after it happens, who? And then as it relates to sexuality and gender, mom and dad, you and I should be the safest place for our kids to come to us with those things that they're wrestling with. I know that's the heart of every parent. The heart of every mom and dad is, I want to be a safe place. I want to be a safe person. If a teenager doesn't feel like they can go to their parents, they're going to go to somebody else. And thank God at Renovation Hampstead, they have you or your amazing team of leaders. But not every kid is there. But every kid has a trusted adult or a caregiver in their life. And we should all want to be that person. In fact, I mean, don't you want it to be you, mom and dad? Don't you want your children coming to you? You and I should want it to be us. So that's just the idea. I added some questions for us to wrestle with. And obviously, if we'd have been able to be there in person, it would have sparked a ton of conversation for us to have Q&A. And I'm more than willing to do that now if you want to do that.
Yeah, for sure. No, this is so good. I was just thinking a lot more about just the moment where the conversation happens, right? It's like your kid brings something to you. We've talked about body language. We've talked about preparing for responses, which I think is so huge, right? Sometimes we're like, oh, I know how I would handle that, right? And you kind of have an idea in your head. It's going to go like this. It's like, but when it starts coming out, right, of your mouth, it's not nearly as articulate or as well thought out as you maybe originally thought it was. So thinking about having the conversation with the parent, and I know that this is so situational, but are there maybe any like other big pitfalls or things that parents should just be aware of? I thought you brought up such a good point when we met for the parent night here. You had this thought where it was there will be a stage in parenting where you can be your kid's friend, but now's not the time.
Mm-hmm.
And man, that's a hard hitting truth even for me as I sit and as I lead other parents who lead in our youth ministry and stuff. And I think that is a challenge I see a lot in our youth ministry and in students and in parenting is like, man, do hard conversations not go well because, as you've mentioned, responsibility, right, falls on the parent to handle it well. Is a parent concerned about, I want to be my kid's friend here and not parent, if there needs to be discipline or advice or encouragement or safety. And I don't know, I'm just thinking through, like, where do parents get jammed up? Is it like, I want to be your friend and try to be cool? Is it, man, you brought me a question about gender identity and I don't even know what I think. It's like, I know it's out there, but I've kind of been avoiding the research on it because that's just a whole new world and that's scary to me. I don't know if that maybe makes sense what I'm asking, but like, are there maybe like a couple different things you see or maybe have personally experienced or in working with a lot of parents, like, man, parents, this is maybe the why behind why the conversation is awkward or clunky, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I actually think that's a brilliant question, Jordan. I think it trends to either extreme. One extreme is the mom and dad who desperately want their child to love them or like them. And a lot of that is the result of how we were parented.
Mm-hmm.
The therapy that I've been in, one of the things that our therapists really helped me understand is that the more that you understand your own backstory, the better you're going to be helping your children, because we respond from the narrative that's been instilled in us. And a lot of all of the data, especially with Generation Z parents, is that generally speaking, and I want to repeat, this is generally speaking, because a parent who's watching this probably doesn't fit in this category. But the generalization of parents of Generation Z is they're underprotective. And the reason why so many of them are underprotective is because they were parented by helicopter parents. And so the knee-jerk reaction is to go to the extreme and want their son or daughter to like them or to think they're cool or whatever.
Yeah.
We're also, as the parent of 3 Gen Zers, all the data supports the fact that our generation of parents are the first generation in the history of our country that haven't looked forward to getting old. We're doing everything we can to almost outpace aging. So there's something in us that wants to feel younger, look younger, be cool, and we certainly want our children to feel the same way. So the temptation will be, if our children feel or have enough courage to share something with us, that we can almost diminish it. Because, and the question that I have to ask myself is, whose best interest am I really looking out for? Because if it is too scathing, it makes me look bad to my friends as a parent, and it makes my child look bad to their friends, and it could cause a chasm between he or she and me.
Yeah.
The opposite extreme, and this is where I lived, was the need to be respected, or the supposed need to be respected, and obedience, and from this place of authoritarianism. Yeah. And I think this is a pitfall for a lot of moms and dads, that when you do finally, it's so important the way we handle not only our body language, but our tone of voice, actually the words that we respond with. Because, and I'm just going to be very vulnerable and candid with you, Kelly and I have raised 3 incredibly strong, brave, courageous young men and women. And their response often supported what I just said. And when I wanted them to be contrite, or listen to what I have to tell you, they would push back. And as soon as they pushed back, Jordan, I would lose my cool. They weren't disagreeing with what I was saying. They just wanted to understand the why behind the what.
Yeah.
Because that's what strong-willed kids do. And I interpreted it as a lack of respect.
Mm-hmm.
Even though this is how jacked up of a dad I am, they had already come to me to share with me something deep and vulnerable.
Yeah.
I was interpreting their response as being disrespectful, and it just wasn't true. So I think it can be both sides. I think this is a
Yeah, that's good.
pitfall because sometimes moms and dads, your kids just need to talk. They have held it in for so long. Another thing that comes into play here is the different personalities of our children. Some of your children are verbal processors. Like we have a verbal processor, we have a thinker, and then we have what is almost, our middle daughter is almost a mute. Like just to get her to talk is a miracle. So if the middle one especially starts talking, for me to immediately jump to disrespect is the dumbest thing that I could do as a parent.
Yeah.
And then you swing that all the way to the side of, whose best interests are you looking out for? Because it feels as if you're trying to protect yourself because your cool factor is being upset.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's really helpful. I have one more question.
Yep.
Well, for a parent who, let's just say hasn't handled the hard conversation super well in the last few years or months, or maybe they're like, man, I really wish, this would have come out before this past Friday because something went down, and
right.
I'm
not laughing at Friday. I feel that. Yeah.
or the conversation went down, and man, I missed it. I missed the mark on it. I had a chance, and I missed it, and I'm seeing now. And there's maybe just some guilt. There's some regret. There's fear. There's all of those things there, and of course, we're wanting to build that relational bridge. We're wanting that to be able to bear the weight of truth, as you talked about a few weeks ago. What can a parent do right now to be like, okay, I messed up on that one last week, but I want to make sure that, moving forward, I can be safe. I can do this, and I want to be a voice of reason in your life and be safe. Does a parent need to initiate a hard conversation with their kid? And, hey, I'm going to speak up now and go first, and I'm going to apologize. I'm asking you for your forgiveness. What can a parent do if they feel like maybe their kid right now is not seeing them as a safe place?
Well, trust is the currency of relationships. And I think one thing we have to realize is that it is possible for us to be bankrupt relationally with our children. And too many withdrawals, and we can become relationally, spiritually, emotionally, intellectually bankrupt with our kids. It's not impossible for you to get back in the black, but I think sociologists and psychologists have said for every dose of rejection, it takes 5 doses of acceptance. So I think we have to keep in mind that our children, you may think, well, you're just not getting over this. I messed up. I think it's incredibly important for us to be contrite and ask and beg for forgiveness. But I think it's also immature and illogical for us to expect there to be immediate, oh, okay, my mom and dad are asking, the less times that has happened, the more likely a quicker bounce back. But the more times we are reactive and angry in our response, the harder it is for our children to trust us. So I think it's always the right call and the right move to beg for forgiveness if you mean it. Mm-hmm. And then I think we have to have the maturity to give our children time to work it out. One of the things our youngest daughter brought to my attention, Jordan, I was really, really good at asking forgiveness and being incredibly articulate with it, but I would do it via text or a note. And then she would, and one day she had enough courage to go, Dad, I really appreciate that, but why can't you just tell me that to my face? Which I'm like, go talk to your mom. I don't like you anymore because you're right. But she was right. So sometimes our children are actually giving us clues and cues as to what they need from us. You are not irredeemable as a parent, but we have to understand if we have been consistently inconsistent with our kids, it is only consistency that's going to allow us. That's going to allow us to be able to catch up. So one of the things I've found myself doing now with our adult children is I stay quiet a lot more. And it's not that I am disengaged. I am purposefully going, just keep your stupid mouth shut, because more times than not, when you open it, crap comes out, But what that discipline does is it allows me to be very, very conscious of my tone. My worst trait that I inherited from my father, I think it's genetic, is my stare. One of the things that I think would be helpful for every parent is to ask your children, what is it like to be on the other side of me? And all three of our kids have said, the way you look at me when you're disappointed in me absolutely destroys me. So I have asked, you want to talk about the fruit of the Spirit, bearing themselves in your life. I continually ask God, I want love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control to be what my kids see, what our kids see when they talk to their father. I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah.
But you're not irredeemable, but just like you didn't get into a hole overnight, you won't get out of it overnight, especially if you've been really consistent at being inconsistent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. No, that makes sense. Stuart, man, I appreciate so much your time to be willing to sit down and not just do this once, but to do it twice. It means a lot.
We can do it again, man. I love you, and I love
going to benefit from it.
I love you, and I love the people there. So any way I can ever help, we could all do this 1,000% perfectly, and it would still. There is no guarantees. Yeah. Parenting is not for sissies, and we're dumb enough to do it. Some of us multiple times. So,
yeah. Thank you so much, man. We really appreciate it.